Head of Palestine-Israel program and senior fellow at the Arab Center in Washington, D.C., Yousef Munayyer. For more on this, Yousef, thank you for coming on. How significant is this U.S. deployment to Israel, and does this mean Israel's more focused on Iran than Hezbollah members in Lebanon?
Well, it's a clear signal that the United States is getting more deeply involved in this war than it already was, and it already was extremely involved in this war. But now we're seeing American boots being sent onto the ground, something that I think the vast majority of Americans oppose. In fact, most Americans have wanted to see a ceasefire here, and most Americans want to see the use of weapons shipments to Israel used as leverage to bring this war to an end. And this is clearly the opposite of that, as more weapons are being sent to Israel, and now American troops are being put on the ground to operate them, putting more Americans in harm's way as well, to support a war that has claimed tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of lives at this point, continues to expand, goes against American interests. And it's not really clear why the Biden administration continues to double and triple down on everything but actually using leverage to bring this war to an end.
What kind of leverage do you think they should use, Yousef?
I think it's quite clear. This war cannot be continued by the Israeli military without the constant support of U.S. arms. And the minute that the President Biden decides to shut off the tap, a tap that he has kept open in massive ways as Israel commits war crime after war crime, in fact, getting them indicted at the International Criminal Court, getting them charged with genocide at the International Court of Justice by a whole host of nations, including American allies. This is leverage that's always existed, but it's leverage that President Biden has refused to use. You know, unlike Ronald Reagan, who in the 1980s picked up the phone, he called the Israeli prime minister and he said, look, this has got to stop now, when Israel was bombing Beirut. And he hung up the phone, and within 20 minutes, the bombing campaign was ordered to end. And Ronald Reagan at the time said, wow, I didn't realize I had that power. The reality is the United States has more leverage over Israel today than ever before. We've got U.S. troops being sent on the ground to help defend this Israeli war. And, you know, if President Biden wants to, he can bring this to an end at any point. Instead, he is embroiling the United States deeper and in a more dangerous way in a war that has had deadly costs, first and foremost for Palestinians, but will increasingly have costs for Americans as well.
And we should point out that Israel has said they've done everything to try to limit civilian casualties here, and that Hamas and Hezbollah are using civilians as human shields. But I want to talk about something out of the UN now, because the UN says Israel is firing at the United Nations interim force in Lebanon. Now, this is normally a peacekeeper group based in southern Lebanon. They've been there for 46 years. The Israeli prime minister is now warning them to evacuate. What do you make of that?
Well, Diane, I want to say I appreciate you pointing out what the Israeli military says. I do think, though, it's important from a journalistic perspective to be clear that they have been repeatedly caught lying when they make these statements. Time and time again, by in-depth investigative reports, including great investigative reporting that ABC News and so many others have done over the years into Israeli massacres, like the one we saw last night in Gaza, where patients were burnt alive while still connected to IVs in the courtyards of hospitals. And so these statements are often put out by the Israeli military, you know, telling you not to believe your lying eyes and that there's always an excuse. But anytime anyone looks into this, we've seen a steady pattern of lying about this. And ultimately, we see a pattern of targeting of civilians. This past week, the New York Times had a report from 65 doctors who served inside the Gaza Strip from all over the world, who were there for no reason other than to try to save human life. And they testified that they daily saw children with wounds, sniper shots to the head and to the chest that could only have been done by deliberate targeting. You know, the rest of the world has stopped believing the nonsense that comes from the Israeli military. And this war will only continue for as long as we here in the United States, who are paying for it, are willing to believe these lies as well.
All right, head of Palestine-Israel program and senior fellow at the Arab Center, Yousef Munayyer. Yousef, thank you.
Thanks for having me.